How you doing? Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness is officially out now in theaters, and as the 200th release from Marvel Studios, I gotta say something, guys. We all know that I haven't been the biggest fan of Marvel's work in Phase 4. So, imagine my surprise when I walked out of this movie with more positives than negatives. I know. I'm just as surprised as you are.
Be inspired to do things differently.
One of the most anticipated releases of the year is out now in theaters for all to see, and as someone who has become increasingly disillusioned with the work of one Marvel Studios, imagine my surprise when I came out of the theater with a positive opinion of this movie, because for as much as I have been cynical and jaded about Marvel's output during Phase 4, even dating back to Spider-Man Far From Home, I held out the slightest of hope for this movie, and the only reason I had any hope for this movie whatsoever was because of one Sam Raimi. Sam Raimi is responsible for two of the greatest comic book movies ever made. But despite my hope going into this movie, it was also mixed with the feeling of anxiety. I was worried about how much creative freedom Sam Raimi would actually have when trying to work with Kevin Feige and trying to work within the confines of the MCU formula and the MCU structure. How would Sam Raimi be able to break through all of this when a fellow horror director in Scott Derrickson left the movie specifically for creative differences with Kevin Feige? It made me nervous. No amount of hope could overshadow this, because we all know how the MCU works by now. And the amount of relief and excitement that I felt when I sat down to watch this movie was surprising, because this is Sam Raimi. For the first time, I feel like a Marvel movie was made by an artist with a voice. There is someone behind the camera that has something to say, instead of a mindless drone that was working in Kevin Feige's underground money printing factory. Sam Raimi was able to inject his personality and style into Multiverse of Madness while also working within the confines of the MCU. It has his signature filmmaking style. For the first time in what feels like the entire history of the MCU, a director is unafraid to make creative and daring choices. The cinematography is actually unique. Raimi moves the camera. Raimi makes bold and creative editing choices. The movie actually looks like a movie. It still looks flat and desaturated like other Marvel films, but it has real contrast, which makes everything feel a little bit more palpable. It feels like there are real stakes because there are extras. There are people that inhabit this world apart from the characters we spend time with. This is a story about people. It is about Stephen Strange, the person. It's about Wanda Maximoff, the person. And I was overjoyed by this fact, because we haven't seen this from Marvel in so long. There are about 4 or 5 sequences in this movie that are so signature Sam Raimi that you can't help but enjoy yourself, because again, it just is so refreshing to see a filmmaker be able to inject their own filmmaking style and language into a Marvel film, because we haven't seen that in so long. And because of this, because of Raimi's creative choices, the movie stands out from the rest of the MCU. Yes, there are moments where you can tell Feige stepped in and made Sam Raimi include some fan service moments, made him include a cameo to set things up for the future, but those are never the focus of Multiverse of Madness. They don't overshadow the story, they don't overshadow the characters, and that is what I admire most about this movie. Despite Kevin Feige and the higher-ups at Marvel Studios clearly stepping in at certain moments during this movie, and especially during the final 20 minutes of this movie, Sam Raimi still manages to make this his own film. He still manages to make his voice heard. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness is a movie that is absolutely Sam Raimi, with the horror, the campy scares, even a little bit of gore. And as much as Sam Raimi is known for his indulgence and just the right amount of the macabre, Sam Raimi is also a deeply humanistic filmmaker, and that is where this movie shines. It's actually a really human and emotional story. I can't tell you how satisfied I was to see Wanda's beautiful, tragic, heartbreaking character arc continue from WandaVision and really run with that. Never once does this movie feel like it is disrespecting what happened in WandaVision, and never once does this movie downplay what Wanda actually had to go through. This movie fully acknowledges the pain and the suffering of grief and loss, and it never talks down to the audience. Instead, for once, a Marvel movie is unafraid to show us the dark side of human emotions. This movie shows us how grief can corrupt us, how it can destroy us, how it can make us someone we don't want to be. We can lose ourselves in the depths of these more difficult emotions that we all experience at some point in our lives. And for the first time, Marvel did not shy away from that, and it's because Sam Raimi would not let that happen. Wanda never quips throughout this movie. Not once does she stop to crack a joke and make light about her pathos-driven quest. She is an empathetic antagonist that you understand. You fully understand where she's coming from and why she's doing what she's doing. You don't have to agree with it, but there is a running theme throughout this movie about how far we will go to attain happiness. And this character arc for Wanda is mirrored by Steven's own character arc. How far are you willing to push these powers? How far are you willing to push the limits of magic to attain happiness? And the conclusion that Sam Raimi and this film arrive at, that happiness is not about finding or achieving or creating a perfect reality. It is about accepting what we have in the moment and being content with that and building on that. That is how we can become happy. That is the most mature thing Marvel has done in a very long time. And that resonated with me deeply. In addition to a deeply human story, Raimi's wonderful filmmaking flourishes and unique editing, and cinematography, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness finds fun and inventive ways to utilize the powers of Doctor Strange and Wanda. We see one of the most creative fights in the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe towards the end of this movie. It is an absolute stunner, both in terms of concept and visuals. Sam Raimi loves these characters, and that comes through in every single frame. These feel like people that actually live in New York instead of chess pieces moving along the MCU board. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness is flawed. It's not perfect. Every movie has its flaws. Do I think this movie has a little bit of an issue with continuity? Yes, I do. And at times, in some ways, I think this movie feels more disjointed from the Marvel Cinematic Universe than several entries before it. And I do think that at times, this movie highlights what Marvel has really struggled with throughout Phase 4, which is the spirit of character. That was something Marvel was always exceptional at prior to the release of Avengers Endgame, and it seems to be something they've really lost. This movie is not without its flaws. It's rushed. The pacing is breakneck. And America Chavez feels more like a plot device rather than an actual character. But for as much as this movie feels disjointed or unfocused, Sam Raimi is always there to pull us back, to remind us of what really matters about this movie, which is the story of Stephen Strange, the story of Wanda Maximoff, and this theme of, are you happy? Welcome back. I know it's been a while, long time no see. I have been trying to put things together for the 100th video because, believe it or not, that's where we're at with this channel. I never thought we would get there, but here we are. So let's pretend that this is not the 100th video, and I will work diligently on getting the real 100th video out as soon as possible. Otherwise, thank you to all of these subscribers that have stuck with me throughout my wildly inconsistent journey on YouTube. Thank you for watching, everybody. Have a good night. I hope you're all doing well. Take care.